I'm Nicholas Vale, 34, and I was about to close the most important deal of my life. Somewhere over the Atlantic, sipping champagne and reviewing final contracts for a $3.2 billion acquisition. My phone lit up with a message that stopped my heart. Termination effective immediately. Do not contact clients. My own partners had just fired me by text while finalizing their biggest payday ever. The humiliation burned, but as I stared at those signed documents in my hands, I realized something they'd overlooked in their rush to betray me. What happened next would cost them everything and change my life forever. If this story of corporate betrayal resonates with you, please like and subscribe, because sometimes the tables turn in the most unexpected ways. 7 years ago, I was a different person entirely. Fresh out of Harvard Business School, drowning in student loans, and desperate for any opportunity that would validate the sacrifices I'd made. That's when Meridian Capital Partners offered me a lifeline, or what I thought was one. The original employment contract sat in front of me like a legal fortress. 23 pages of dense terminology that would define my professional existence. I remember the conference room where I signed. The mahogany table reflecting the afternoon sun streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan. Richard Blackwood, the founding partner, had smiled warmly as he slid the document across the polished surface. "Nicholas, we see tremendous potential in you," he'd said, his silver hair catching the light. "This contract reflects our commitment to your future with Meridian." What it really reflected was a web of restrictions designed to keep me captive. The non-compete clause stretched across 3 continents and lasted 18 months post-employment. The confidentiality agreement was so broad, it practically prohibited me from discussing the weather if it might relate to market conditions. Most crushing of all was the compensation structure, a base salary that seemed generous to my 27-year-old self, but bonuses tied to partnership track that always seemed just out of reach. I'd been so hungry for success, so eager to prove myself, that I'd signed without truly understanding what I was agreeing to. The golden handcuffs felt comfortable at first, the prestige and promise of partnership making the restrictions seem reasonable. After all, why would I want to leave a firm that was investing so heavily in my future? The irony wasn't lost on me. Now, 30,000 feet above the Atlantic, that those same golden handcuffs had just been unlocked by the very people who'd forged them. In their haste to dispose of me, they'd forgotten one crucial detail buried in Section 12.4 of that original contract, clause that voided all restrictive covenants in cases of termination without cause during active deal negotiations. I built their European acquisition division from absolutely nothing. When I started, Meridian's international presence was a joke. A few failed attempts at London partnerships and a Zurich office that existed mainly for tax purposes. They'd hired me specifically to change that, to crack the code of European family businesses and their complex ownership structures. Those early years were brutal. I lived out of hotel rooms, learned to navigate cultural nuances from Stockholm to Naples, and slowly built a network of relationships that would become the foundation of everything that followed. The partners back in New York saw only the expense, reports, and the slow initial progress. They couldn't understand the European business moved differently. That trust was earned over years, not quarters, but I understood. I spoke their language, not just Italian or German, but the deeper language of generational wealth and family legacy. I knew that behind every major European acquisition was a story of fathers and sons, of traditions being passed down or reluctantly abandoned. These weren't just transactions. They were family sagas played out in boardrooms and legal documents. The breakthrough came in year 4 when I closed the Hoffman Industries deal, $800 million acquisition that should have made my career. Instead, the senior partner swooped in for the signing ceremony, posed for the photos, and accepted the accolades while I watched from the back of the room. That was the moment I should have left, But the golden handcuffs held firm. My equity was vesting, my partnership track was progressing, and walking away would have meant starting over with nothing. So I stayed, and I kept building. Each success became our success. Each relationship I'd carefully cultivated became Meridian's relationship. The European division grew into the firm's most profitable unit, but somehow that success never translated into the recognition or compensation I'd been promised. The warning signs had been there for months. Hushed conversations that stopped when I entered rooms. Partners who'd once included me in strategic discussions, suddenly leaving me out of key meetings. The gradual erosion of my authority as they brought in their own people who'd inherited the relationships I'd spent years building. Now, staring at that original contract on my laptop screen, I realized they'd made the most expensive mistake in Meridian's history. In their arrogance, they'd forgotten that I knew every clause, every loophole, every protection I'd originally signed away. More importantly, they'd forgotten that I was the one who'd built the very relationships they were trying to steal. The Castellano Industries opportunity had landed on my desk 8 months ago, hidden in a pile of routine intelligence reports about European market activity. Most people would have dismissed it as just another family business rumor, but I'd learned to read between the lines of these reports. Antonio Castellano was the third-generation patriarch of a sprawling industrial empire that most Americans had never heard of, but that dominated sectors from automotive components to renewable energy infrastructure across southern Europe. The family had built their fortune on discretion, quality, and an almost pathological aversion to public attention. When whispers began circulating about a potential succession crisis, I knew this was the opportunity I'd been waiting for. The confidential deal memo I drafted became my masterpiece: 47 pages of intricate financial analysis, cultural, insights, and strategic recommendations that would have impressed any investment banking legend. I'd spent weeks in Milan, Rome, and Naples, not just crunching numbers, but understanding the human dynamics that would make or break any potential transaction. The Castellano family wasn't just selling a business. They were potentially ending a century-old legacy. Antonio's 2 sons had different visions for the company's future. Marco, the elder, wanted to expand aggressively into emerging markets. Giuseppe, the younger, favored a more conservative approach focused on sustainable technologies. Neither had the temperament or the capital to buy out the other, and Antonio was caught in the middle, watching his life's work become a source of family discord. My approach was radically different from Meridian's typical slash-and-burn acquisition style. Instead of swooping in with aggressive offers and restructuring plans, I spent months building genuine relationships. I attended family dinners, learned about their history, and showed respect for what they built. I understood that for families like the Castellanos, the right buyer mattered more than the highest price. The breakthrough came during a quiet conversation with Antonio in his private study, surrounded by photos spanning 3 generations of Castellano leadership. He'd looked at me with tired eyes and said, "Nicholas, I need someone who understands that this isn't just about money. This is about ensuring my family's legacy continues in the right hands." That's when I knew I had them. Not because I was manipulating them, but because I genuinely understood what they needed. The deal I structured wasn't just an acquisition. It was a carefully crafted transition plan that would preserve the Castellano family's involvement while providing the capital and expertise they needed to compete globally. The $3.2 billion valuation was fair, even generous, but the real innovation was in the structure. Rather than a standard buyout, I'd proposed a partnership model that would allow the family to maintain operational control while Meridian provided strategic guidance and capital for expansion. It was complex, requiring multiple legal jurisdictions and innovative tax structures, but it was exactly what both parties needed. The partners in New York initially resisted my approach. They wanted a traditional acquisition with immediate cost-cutting opportunities and obvious synergies. They couldn't understand that the Castellanos would walk away from any deal that didn't respect their values and vision. But when I explained the potential returns, both financial and strategic, they reluctantly gave me the authority to proceed. What I didn't realize was that they were already planning to cut me out. The deal memo I'd written with such care and precision was being circulated internally with their names attached. My strategic insights were being presented as firm philosophy rather than individual innovation. Most insidiously, my carefully cultivated relationship with the Castellano family was being repositioned as a Meridian institutional relationship. The signs were subtle at first. Partners who'd never shown interest in European markets suddenly became experts on Italian family businesses. Senior associates were being briefed on details they could have only learned from reading my confidential reports. Most telling of all, Richard Blackwood began scheduling his own calls with Antonio Castellano, positioning himself as the senior relationship manager. I should have seen it coming. In 7 years at Meridian, I'd watched this pattern repeat itself with other successful associates. The firm had a systematic approach to harvesting talent. They'd allow promising individuals to develop expertise and relationships, then gradually assume control of both. The associate would be rewarded with modest bonuses and vague promises of future partnership, while the firm captured the real value. But the Castellano deal was different. This wasn't just another transaction. It was the culmination of everything I'd learned about European business culture and family dynamics. I'd spent months earning their trust, understanding their concerns, and crafting a solution that served their needs rather than just Meridian's profit margins. The irony was that by sending me to Rome to close the deal, they'd actually handed me the keys to my own liberation. They thought they were protecting themselves by keeping me busy with execution while they managed the relationship. Instead, they'd given me the perfect opportunity to discover just how little they valued my contribution. As I sat in that first-class seat, reviewing the final contract terms, I realized that every page represented not just months of work, but years of expertise that Meridian had taken for granted. The legal structures, the cultural insights, the relationship management, all of it had come from my brain, my experience, my dedication. Now, they thought they could simply discard me once the deal was signed, keeping all the benefits while eliminating what they saw as an expensive liability. They'd forgotten one crucial detail. In their haste to remove me from the equation, they'd overlooked the fact that I was the equation. The boarding pass in my wallet felt like a golden ticket that morning. First class to Rome, paid for by Meridian Capital Partners, the firm that had finally, after 7 years of promises, recognized my value. At least, that's what I thought. As I settled into seat 2A, accepting the flight attendant's offer of champagne before we'd even pushed back from the gate, the irony of that moment still haunts me. There I was, toasting my future partnership track, completely unaware that my colleagues back in Manhattan were already planning my professional funeral. The flight manifest would later become a crucial piece of evidence in the legal proceedings that followed. But at the time, it was just another routine document in what I thought would be a triumphant business trip. I packed carefully for this trip, knowing that everything had to be perfect. My best suits, Italian leather shoes, the Mont Blanc pen that had been my one indulgence after the Hoffman deal. This wasn't just another acquisition closing. This was my moment to prove that I belonged at the senior partner level. The Castellano deal would be the crowning achievement that finally earned me the respect and compensation I'd been working toward for 7 years. The flight itself was a dream. 8 hours of uninterrupted time to review every detail of the transaction, to prepare for every possible question or concern the Castellanos might raise. I'd brought 3 copies of the final contracts, each one representing months of negotiations. and legal refinements. The documents were beautiful in their complexity, a testament to the sophisticated deal-making that had become my specialty. During the first hour, I called Elena from the airphone, my voice full of excitement and anticipation. "This is it," I told her, watching the coastline of Massachusetts disappear below us. "After tomorrow, everything changes. They'll have to make me a partner after this." She'd been cautiously optimistic, as always. Elena had watched me chase partnership. For years, had seen the disappointments and the broken promises. But something in my voice that day convinced her this time was different. "I'm proud of you," she said simply. "You've earned this." Those words meant everything to me. Elena had sacrificed as much as I had during those 7 years. The long hours, the constant travel, the dinners missed, and weekends spent working. She'd supported it all because she believed in what I was building. The success of the Castellano deal wouldn't just be mine. It would be ours. The meal service was exceptional, even by first-class standards. Meridian had spared no expense, booking me on the flagship flight with all the amenities. I remember thinking how different this felt from my early days at the firm, when I'd flown coach to save money and spent my own funds on client dinners. Now I was traveling like the senior executive I'd always believed I could become. I spent the middle hours of the flight reviewing my presentation materials one final time. The Castellano family had requested a formal ceremony for the signing, complete with their legal team and key family members. It would be my moment to shine, to demonstrate the relationship-building skills that had made the deal possible in the first place. The contracts themselves were works of art. Each page represented a different aspect of the complex international transaction currency hedging, tax optimization, regulatory compliance across multiple jurisdictions. I'd worked with lawyers in 4 countries to create a structure that protected everyone's interests while maximizing the strategic value for both parties. This wasn't just an acquisition. It was a masterclass in sophisticated deal-making. As we began our descent toward Rome, I allowed myself a moment of pure satisfaction. The eternal city spread out below us, its ancient streets and monuments glowing in the afternoon sun. I'd always loved Rome, the sense of history, the way the past and present coexisted in perfect harmony. It seemed fitting that my own professional transformation would take place in a city that had witnessed so many other momentous occasions. The champagne had made me philosophical during those final minutes of flight. I thought about my father, who'd worked his entire career as a middle manager without ever taking the risks that real success required. I thought about my business school classmates, most of whom had settled into comfortable but uninspiring corporate roles. I thought about the younger version of myself who'd signed that first contract with Meridian, hungry for opportunity but naive about the price of success. All of that was about to change. The Castellano deal would establish me as one of the premier deal-makers in European acquisitions. Other firms would recruit me aggressively. Meridian would finally be forced to acknowledge my value and offer me the partnership I'd earned. The golden handcuffs would become golden opportunities. My phone was on airplane mode during the descent, peacefully disconnected from the chaos that was already unfolding back in New York. I had no idea that while I was savoring those final moments of anticipation, my colleagues were celebrating my imminent departure. The boarding pass in my wallet represented more than just a flight to Rome. It was a ticket to a future I'd never imagined possible. As the wheels touched down on Italian soil, I felt a surge of confidence that I hadn't experienced in years. Everything was falling into place exactly as I'd planned. The Castellanos trusted me. The deal was solid, and my future at Meridian was finally secure. I couldn't have been more wrong about any of it. The text message arrived at 3:47 p.m. Rome time, just as I was reviewing the final signing ceremony logistics. The words seemed to blur together as I read them. Nicholas, effective immediately. Your employment with Meridian Capital Partners is Terminated. Please do not contact clients or access company systems. HR will be in touch regarding transition procedures. I stared at the screen until the words lost all meaning, certain that this had to be some kind of mistake. Perhaps a technical error or a message meant for someone else. But there was my name, clearly spelled out, and the message had come from Richard Blackwood's phone number. The same Richard Blackwood who'd shaken my hand 3 days earlier and wished me luck in Rome. My hands were trembling as I tried to call him back. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times before going straight to voicemail. Richard, it's Nicholas. I just received what must be an error message about termination. I'm in Rome about to close our biggest deal. Please call me back immediately. I tried calling the main office line, then my direct supervisor, then the head of HR. Every call went to voicemail or was answered by assistants who claimed no knowledge of my situation. Within 30 minutes, I'd been completely cut off from the firm that had defined my professional identity for 7 years. That's when the second message arrived, and this one changed everything. It was a WhatsApp thread that had been forwarded to me by mistake, a conversation between the 3 senior partners that was never meant for my eyes. Operation complete, Richard had written. Nicholas is officially terminated. Legal confirms he can't touch the Castellano deal now. Perfect timing, came the reply from James Morrison, the managing partner. He's probably sitting in his hotel room right now wondering what happened. By the time he figures out how to get back to New York, we'll have closed the deal and collected the fees. The third message was from Patricia Wells, the newest senior partner. What about his relationships with the family? They specifically requested him for the signing ceremony. Antonio will understand that business is business, Richard had responded. We'll explain that Nicholas had a family emergency and couldn't make it. I'll handle the signing personally. After all, it's a Meridian deal, not a Nicholas Vale deal. Reading those messages felt like being punched in the stomach by someone you trusted. These weren't just colleagues. They were people I'd worked alongside for years. People who'd attended my wedding. People who'd congratulated me on every success I'd achieved. And they'd been plotting my destruction with the casual cruelty of playground bullies. The scope of their betrayal became clearer as I scrolled through more of the accidentally forwarded conversation. This hadn't been a sudden decision triggered by some recent event. They'd been planning this for months, timing my termination to coincide with the Castellano closing so they could steal both the deal and the credit. The timing is crucial, James had written in an earlier message. We need him in Rome, away from the office, so he can't cause problems when we pull the trigger. By the time he processes what's happened and tries to respond, the deal will be done and he'll be legally powerless to interfere. They'd calculated every aspect of my humiliation with the precision they typically reserved for hostile takeovers. Send me to Rome to keep me isolated. Terminate me while I'm in transit so I can't defend myself. Cut off my access to systems and relationships immediately. Present themselves to the Castellanos as the natural successors to manage the relationship. Going forward, the cruelest part was reading their casual dismissal of my contributions. Nicholas did good work building the European relationships. Patricia had acknowledged, but he's become too expensive and too entitled. Better to cut him loose now and let someone more junior manage the ongoing client relationships. Exactly. Richard had agreed. We gave him 7 years to prove himself worthy of partnership. He's had plenty of opportunities. Time to bring in fresh talent who understand their place in the firm hierarchy. They spoke about me like I was a piece of equipment that had outlived its usefulness, not a human being who dedicated the best years of my career to building their European division. The relationships I'd cultivated over years of patient work were being reduced to line items on a transition checklist. But as I sat there in that Rome hotel room, surrounded by the contracts and presentations I prepared for tomorrow's signing ceremony, I began to feel something beyond anger or hurt. I felt a cold, calculating clarity that I'd never experienced before. They thought they were so clever, timing my termination to prevent me from interfering with their plans. They'd forgotten one crucial detail in their rush to dispose of me. I was still in possession of the signed contracts, and according to the legal opinion letter in my files, my termination had just voided every restrictive covenant in my employment. Agreement. The WhatsApp thread they'd accidentally shared contained more than just evidence of their betrayal. It contained proof of their intent to defraud the Castellano family by misrepresenting the nature of our relationship. Antonio Castellano had specifically requested that I handle the signing ceremony because he trusted me personally, not because he had any particular loyalty to Meridian Capital Partners. As I read through their messages again, taking screenshots of everything, I realized they'd just handed me the perfect opportunity for justice. They wanted to steal my deal? They'd just given me the legal freedom to take it with me. The irony was almost poetic. In their arrogance and haste, they'd created the exact conditions that would allow me to turn their betrayal into my liberation. The golden handcuffs they'd used to control me for 7 years had just been unlocked by their own hand. Tomorrow's signing ceremony was going to be very different from what any of us had planned. The legal opinion letter sat buried in my laptop files, like a time bomb waiting to explode. I'd commissioned it 18 months earlier, during a particularly frustrating period when the partners had blocked my promotion despite record-breaking performance. At the time, I'd been exploring my options, trying to understand exactly what constraints I'd be facing if I ever decided to leave Meridian. The letter was from Whitfield and Associates, one of London's most prestigious employment law firms. I'd paid for it personally, using a Swiss bank account to ensure complete confidentiality. The 40-page analysis had cost me $15,000, but as I reopened it that evening in my Rome hotel room, I realized it might be the best investment I'd ever made. Dear Mr. Vale, the letter began, regarding your inquiry about the enforceability of restrictive covenants in your employment agreement with us, Meridian Capital Partners, we have conducted a comprehensive analysis of the relevant legal precedents across multiple jurisdictions. The key finding was buried in Section 4.3, a dense paragraph of legal terminology that I'd highlighted but never expected to use. Under both New York state law and relevant European employment regulations, restrictive covenants become void and unenforceable when an employee is terminated without cause during the active negotiation or execution of client transactions that the employee originated and managed. The reasoning was straightforward, even elegant. Courts had consistently ruled that employers couldn't use restrictive covenants to prevent employees from benefiting from their own work, especially when the termination appeared to be timed to deprive the employee of compensation or recognition. The law recognized that such terminations were inherently retaliatory and potentially fraudulent, but the opinion letter went further, addressing specific scenarios that seemed almost prophetic. Given my current situation, if an employee is terminated while physically present at a client location for the purpose of completing a transaction, the letter continued, and if the employer subsequently attempts to complete that transaction without the employee's involvement, courts have consistently ruled that the original restrictive covenants are not only void, but that the employee has legitimate claims to the economic benefits of the transaction. I read that passage 3 times, hardly believing the specificity of the legal precedent. The lawyers had cited cases from New York, London, and Frankfurt where employees in exactly my situation had not only been released from their non-compete agreements but had been awarded substantial damages for their employers' attempts to steal their work. The most relevant case was Pemberton v. Goldman Sachs International, where a managing director had been terminated while closing a major acquisition in Tokyo. Goldman had attempted to complete the deal without him, claiming the client relationship belonged to the firm rather than the individual. The court had ruled that the termination was a transparent attempt to avoid paying the employee's success fees and had awarded him both the fees and punitive damages. The legal proceeding was crystal clear. Meridian's attempt to steal the Castellano deal while I was in Rome would not only void my non-compete agreement, but could expose them to significant financial liability. The accidentally forwarded WhatsApp thread would serve as perfect evidence of their intent to defraud both me and the client, but the opinion letter revealed an even more powerful opportunity. Section 6.2 addressed the rights of terminated employees to continue existing client relationships. When restrictive covenants are void due to retaliatory termination, the employee retains full rights to continue serving existing clients in an independent capacity, provided that no confidential information belonging to the former employer is utilized inappropriately. The distinction was crucial. I wouldn't be stealing Meridian's clients. I'd be continuing to serve clients who had specifically requested my personal involvement. The Castellano family had made it clear throughout our negotiations that they were working with me individually, not with Meridian as an institution. Their trust was personal, built through months of relationship building that had nothing to do with Meridian's brand or resources. The legal opinion had even anticipated the question of existing contracts and agreements. Signed documents and completed negotiations represent the employee's work product, the letter stated. When termination occurs during the execution phase of such agreements, the employee retains rights to the economic benefits of their completed work, particularly when the employer's termination appears designed to appropriate those benefits. In other words, the contracts sitting in my briefcase contracts that I have negotiated, structured, and shepherded through months of complex discussions were legally mine to complete independently. Meridian's termination of my employment while I was in Rome to finalize the deal had essentially transferred ownership of the transaction from them to me. The irony was almost overwhelming. Richard Blackwood and his partners had spent months plotting to steal my work, and in their execution of that plan, they'd inadvertently handed me complete ownership of the most valuable deal in Meridian's history. Their betrayal had become my liberation. But the opinion letter contained one final surprise that made my situation even more advantageous. Section 8.1 addressed the fiduciary duties of employers during termination. Employers who terminate employees during active client engagements may be found to have breached their fiduciary duty to both the employee and the client, particularly when the termination appears designed to disrupt established professional relationships for the employer's benefit. This meant that Meridian's actions could be viewed not just as wrongful termination, but as a breach of their fiduciary duty to the Castellano family. By terminating me while I was in Rome to complete their deal, they had potentially damaged the client relationship and created unnecessary risk for a transaction worth $3.20 billion. The legal foundation for my independence was rock solid. I had the right to complete the Castellano deal independently. I had the right to continue serving clients who specifically requested my involvement. Most importantly, I had the right to build a new firm without any restrictions from my former employer. The opinion letter had transformed my termination from a career-ending betrayal into a career-defining opportunity. Meridian thought they were disposing of an expensive liability. Instead, they'd created their most dangerous competitor. As I closed my laptop that evening, looking out at the lights of Rome twinkling in the distance, I felt a sense of calm determination that I'd never experienced before. Tomorrow's signing ceremony would indeed be historic, just not in the way anyone at Quinana Meridian had imagined. The legal opinion letter had given me more than just freedom from my restrictive covenants. It had given me the blueprint for justice. The taxi ride from Fiumicino Airport to the Rome Cavalieri should have been a victory lap. Instead, it felt like a journey between two different versions of my life. The naive optimist, who'd boarded the plane in New York and the battle-hardened strategist who was now planning his independence. The driver, a weathered man named Giuseppe, seemed to sense my mood. "First time in Rome?" he asked, glancing at me in the rearview mirror. "No," I replied, watching the ancient aqueducts flash past. "But it might be the most important." He nodded knowingly. Rome has a way of changing people. The city has seen many transformations over the centuries. Perhaps it will witness another one today. The Rome Cavalieri sat on Monte Mario like a modern palazzo, its terrace offering panoramic views of the eternal city below. Meridian had booked me into the penthouse suite, a final ironic gesture of their respect for my contribution. "Welcome back, Mr. Vale," the concierge said. "I trust your stay will be memorable." The suite was magnificent, 2 levels of Italian luxury with floor-to-ceiling windows that framed St. Peter's Basilica in the distance. I stood at those windows for nearly an hour, processing everything that had happened and everything that was about to happen. The view was transformative. From that height, Rome spread out like a living museum, each neighborhood telling the story of a different era. All of it had endured because Rome understood something fundamental about power and transformation. Sometimes, destruction was necessary for renewal. That's when I understood what was really happening to me. This wasn't just about Meridian's betrayal, or even about the Castellano deal. This was about my own transformation, from employee to entrepreneur, from follower to leader, from victim to victor. I opened my laptop and began making notes. Not about tomorrow's signing ceremony, but about what would come after. The legal opinion letter had given me the framework for independence, but I needed to think strategically about how to build something sustainable. The key insight came as I watched the sunset paint the Roman sky in shades of gold and crimson. Meridian's entire approach to European acquisitions was flawed. They treated these transactions like hostile takeovers, focusing on financial engineering rather than relationship building. They never understood that European family businesses were selling more than assets. They were entrusting their legacies to strangers. I could do better. The relationships I built over 7 years weren't just professional connections. They were genuine friendships based on mutual respect and shared values. The Castellanos weren't the only family who'd felt more comfortable dealing with me personally rather than with Meridian as an institution. The hotel key card sitting on the marble desk represented more than just access to a luxury suite. It represented the moment when I stopped being Nicholas Vale, senior associate at Meridian Capital Partners, and became Nicholas Vale, founder and managing partner of Vale Capital. My phone buzzed with a text from Elena. "How did the meeting go? Can't wait to hear about your triumph." I stared at the message for a long moment, realizing that I hadn't yet told her about the termination. But as I looked out at the eternal city glowing in the twilight, I realized I had a different story to tell. This wasn't about being fired. It was about being freed. I typed back, "Meeting is tomorrow, but something incredible has happened. I'll call you tonight with news that will change everything for us." As night fell over Rome, I felt a sense of calm determination settling into my bones. The eternal city had seen many transformations over the centuries, but tomorrow it would witness something special. The moment when betrayal became the catalyst for triumph. The Castellano family offices occupied 3 floors of a Renaissance palazzo near the Spanish Steps, its understated elegance reflecting the family's preference for discretion over ostentation. As my taxi pulled up to the ancient building, I felt a mixture of anticipation and trepidation that I'd never experienced before any business meeting. Antonio Castellano himself met me in the marble lobby, a gesture of respect that wasn't lost on me. At 73, he moved with the quiet dignity of someone who'd built an empire through patience and principle rather than aggression and haste. "Nicholas, my friend," he said in his accented but precise English, "you look troubled. I hope the flight was not too difficult. Actually, Antonio, something significant has happened that I need to discuss with you before we proceed with the signing ceremony. His expression shifted to one of concern, and he guided me toward a private elevator. Of course. Let us speak in my office where we can have complete privacy. Antonio's personal office was dominated by a massive window overlooking the rooftops of Rome. He gestured for me to sit in one of two leather chairs, then poured espresso from a silver service that had probably been in his family for generations. Now then, he said, settling into the opposite chair. Tell me what troubles you. I began with the text message I'd received on the plane. Antonio's expression darkened as I described the casual cruelty of my termination, the calculated timing designed to steal both the deal and the credit. When I showed him the accidentally forwarded WhatsApp thread, his face flushed with anger I'd never seen from him before. "This is outrageous," he said, his voice tight with controlled fury. "They speak of our relationship as if it were a commodity, to be transferred, as if the trust we've built means nothing. I wanted you to hear this from me directly," I continued. "I understand if you prefer to work with Meridian directly, or if you'd rather postpone the signing until the situation is resolved." Antonio stood and walked to the window. For several minutes, he stared out at the ancient city below. When he finally turned back to me, his expression had transformed from anger to something approaching admiration. "Nicholas, in 47 years of business, I have learned to judge character above all else. Your colleagues at Meridian have shown me theirs. They are opportunists who mistake cunning for wisdom, but you have shown me something far more valuable. You have shown me integrity." He pressed a button on his desk phone. "Marco Giuseppe, please join us immediately, and ask Signora Benedetti to bring the legal team." Within minutes, the office had filled with key figures in the Castellano organization. Marco and Giuseppe listened with growing incredulity as their father recounted my situation. The family's lead attorney, Elena Benedetti, took careful notes while asking pointed questions about the legal implications. "This changes everything," Marco declared. "We cannot do business with people who treat their own colleagues with such disrespect. What would they do to us once they had our signature?" It was Elena Benedetti who cut straight to the heart of the matter. "The question is not whether we should proceed with Meridian. Clearly, we should not. The question is whether we can proceed with Mr. Vale independently." Antonio smiled for the first time since I'd shared my news. "Exactly what I was thinking, Elena. Nicholas, you built this relationship with our family. You understood our needs and created a structure that serves our interests. Why should we work with anyone else?" The next 2 hours felt like a family council where everyone was working toward the same goal. Rather than simply completing the original acquisition, they wanted to establish a formal partnership where I would serve as their exclusive advisor for all international transactions, with the initial capital for my new firm provided by them. "Think of it as seed funding for Vale Capital," Marco suggested with a grin. "We invest in your independence, and you help us build the next generation of our business." The signing ceremony that followed was unlike anything in my experience. Instead of the formal corporate atmosphere I'd expected, it felt more like a celebration among friends. As I signed the documents that would establish Vale Capital as the Castellano's exclusive partner, Antonio raised a glass of champagne. "To new beginnings," he toasted, "and to the kind of partnership that honors both tradition and innovation." The signed acquisition agreement that emerged was more than just a legal document. It was a declaration of independence. As the afternoon drew to a close, Giuseppe pulled me aside. "Nicholas, my father wanted me to tell you something. When we first started working with Meridian, we were never really comfortable with their approach. You were the only one who understood what we were really trying to accomplish." The final surprise came as I was preparing to leave. Antonio handed me an envelope sealed with the family crest. "Don't open this until you're back in your hotel," he instructed. Later that evening, I opened the envelope to find a handwritten letter from Antonio, along with a check that made my eyes widen. The letter explained that the family wanted to provide additional seed capital for Vale Capital, enough to establish a world-class operation without any financial constraints. "Consider this an investment in the future of ethical business," the letter concluded. "We believe that someone with your character and capabilities deserves the opportunity to build something truly exceptional." As I sat holding that check, looking out at the lights of Rome, twinkling in the distance, I realized that Meridian's betrayal had actually been the best thing that ever happened to me. The signed acquisition agreement represented more than just a successful transaction. It was proof that integrity and competence would always triumph over politics and manipulation. The voice recording app on my phone captured one of the most important conversations of my life. Though I didn't activate it intentionally, Elena had called just as I was testing the hotel's conference call system, and the app began recording automatically, a digital artifact that would later become crucial evidence of my emotional state during those pivotal hours. "Nicholas, I've been waiting all day to hear from you." Elena's voice came through crystal clear. "How did the signing go? Are you finally going to get the recognition you deserve?" I sat on the edge of the bed, looking out at the Roman skyline as the sun set behind St. Peter's Basilica. "Elena, something extraordinary has happened. But first, I need to tell you that I was fired." The silence that followed lasted nearly 15 seconds. When Elena finally spoke, her voice was tight with controlled emotion. "What do you mean, fired?" "You're in Rome to close their biggest deal ever." "That's exactly why they fired me," I said. And then I told her everything. The text message, the WhatsApp thread, the calculated timing. Her responses ranged from shock to outrage to something approaching fury. "Those bastards," she said when I finished. "After everything you've given them, how can they just throw you away like that?" "So, what's the plan?" she asked simply. "I assume you're not just going to roll over and let them get away with this." That's when I told her about the legal loophole, about my meeting with the Castellanos and their offer to partner with me in building something entirely new. With each detail, I could hear her excitement building. "Nicholas, this is incredible," she said. "You're telling me that their attempt to steal your deal has actually given you the freedom to take it with you?" "More than that," I replied. "The Castellanos want to be founding investors in Vale Capital. They're offering seed funding that would let us build a world-class operation from day one." Elena immediately began thinking strategically about the transition. "We'll need to be smart about this. Have you thought about office space? You'll need somewhere impressive enough to meet with clients like the Castellanos." Her practical support meant everything to me. This wasn't just about my career. It was about our future together. "I'm scared," I admitted. "What if I fail? What if I'm not as good as I think I am without Meridian's brand behind me?" Elena's response was immediate and unwavering. "Nicholas, you are the only reason Meridian has a European division. You built those relationships yourself. The only difference now is that you'll get the credit and compensation you deserve." Her confidence in my abilities was humbling and inspiring. "You've spent 7 years proving yourself to people who would never give you the recognition you earned. Now you get to prove yourself to people who already believe in you, starting with me." The recording captured the moment when my voice broke slightly. "I love you," I said simply. "I couldn't do this without knowing you believe in me." "I've always believed in you," she replied. "Sometimes more than you believed in yourself. But this betrayal might be exactly what you needed to finally break free from trying to please people who were never going to appreciate you anyway." We talked for another hour, planning practical details and dreaming about possibilities. Elena suggested hiring a top-tier lawyer to ensure Meridian couldn't interfere with my new venture. She volunteered to research European business regulations. "One more thing," she said as our conversation wound down. Don't let anger drive your decisions. The best revenge is building something so successful that they'll spend years regretting their mistake. Her wisdom was perfect, as always. The recording captured my promise to focus on building rather than destroying, on creating value rather than seeking mere vengeance. I'm proud of you, Elena said in closing. Not because you've made money or closed a big deal, but because you've shown the integrity to walk away from people who don't deserve you and the courage to bet on yourself. As I ended the call and looked out at the eternal city glowing in the twilight, I realized that the voice recording had captured more than just a conversation between husband and wife. It had documented the moment when Nicholas Vale, struggling employee, transformed into Nicholas Vale, confident entrepreneur. The partnership that mattered most wasn't with Meridian or even with the Castellanos. It was with Elena, and her unwavering support had just given me the foundation I needed to build an empire. The Swiss bank account documents arrived by courier at my Rome hotel the next morning, cream-colored papers that represented the formal birth of Vale Capital. I'd spent half the night on encrypted calls with bankers in Zurich, lawyers in Geneva, and accountants in London, laying the groundwork for what would become one of Europe's most successful independent advisory firms. Switzerland had been the obvious choice for Vale Capital's headquarters. The country's legendary discretion, sophisticated financial infrastructure, and favorable regulatory environment made it perfect for the kind of high-level family office work I intended to pursue. More importantly, Swiss banking laws would provide an additional layer of protection against any potential interference from Meridian. The account opening process had been surprisingly smooth, largely due to a recommendation from Antonio Castellano. By 8 a.m. Rome time, I had a fully operational business account with a credit line sufficient to lease office space, hire staff, and begin operations immediately. The initial deposit from the Castellano partnership was substantial enough to fund operations for 2 years, even if I didn't close another deal. The first hire was Sarah Chun, my former assistant at Meridian, who'd been quietly documenting the partners' increasingly erratic behavior for months. When I called her from Rome to offer her the position of Chief Operating Officer at Vale Capital, her response was immediate. "I was wondering when you'd finally get tired of their garbage," she said with characteristic directness. "I've already updated my resume and started researching Swiss work permits. When do you need me in Zurich?" Within 48 hours, she'd identified 3 potential office locations, researched local employment laws, and begun the process of transferring our most important files and contacts. Her institutional knowledge of my relationships and deal pipeline would be invaluable in establishing credibility with new clients. The second hire was Marcus Webb, a former Goldman Sachs director who'd grown frustrated with the increasingly political atmosphere at large investment banks. When I explained Vale Capital's vision of relationship-based advisory work, he didn't hesitate. "I've been looking for an opportunity like this for years," he said during our video call. "The big banks have lost sight of what this business is supposed to be about: serving clients, not serving internal politics. Count me in." The office space came together with similar efficiency. Rather than competing with established firms for prestigious addresses in financial districts, I chose a restored 18th century palazzo in Zurich's Old Town. The building offered the perfect combination of historical gravitas and modern technology, with conference rooms that would impress the most sophisticated clients. The legal structure I'd chosen was deliberately sophisticated, designed to protect both the firm and its clients from potential interference. Vale Capital was incorporated as a Swiss private limited company, with subsidiaries in Luxembourg for tax optimization and London for regulatory compliance. But the most important foundation wasn't legal or financial, it was cultural. From the beginning, I was determined that Vale Capital would operate according to principles that Meridian had abandoned in its pursuit of short-term profits. Client relationships would be based on trust and mutual respect, not on information asymmetries. and aggressive sales tactics. The firm's mission statement, which I drafted during a late night overlooking Lake Zurich, reflected these values. Vale Capital exists to serve as a trusted advisor to European family businesses and institutional investors, providing sophisticated financial guidance while honoring the traditions and values that define our clients' legacies. The contrast with Meridian's approach couldn't have been more stark, where they saw family businesses as inefficient organizations to be optimized. I saw them as repositories of wisdom and stability that could benefit from modern financial techniques without sacrificing their core identity. The Swiss bank account documents sitting on my desk represented more than just the founding of a new firm. They represented a new model for how financial services could be delivered. Vale Capital would compete not by being bigger or more aggressive than established firms, but by being more thoughtful, more reliable, and more aligned with our clients' actual needs. As I signed the final incorporation documents that evening, watching the sun set over the Alps in the distance, I felt a profound sense of gratitude for the betrayal that had made this moment possible. Meridian's partners thought they were ending my career when they fired me by text message. Instead, they'd given me the freedom to build something far better than anything I could have achieved within their constraints. The foundation was solid. Now it was time to build an empire. The angry email chain that would later be subpoenaed began at 6:23 a.m. Eastern Time, 3 days after my termination. Richard Blackwood had arrived at his Manhattan office to find a voice message from Antonio Castellano that shattered their confidence. "Richard, this is Antonio Castellano," the message said in clipped, formal tones. "The Castellano family will not be proceeding with Meridian Capital Partners. We have decided to work exclusively with Nicholas Vale and his new firm. Please do not contact us again." The first email was from Richard to James Morrison and Patricia Wells. Marked urgent. "The Castellano deal has imploded. They're refusing to work with us and have decided to follow Nicholas to his new firm. How did a terminated employee just walk away with our biggest client?" James Morrison's response came 23 minutes later. "This is a disaster. The Castellano deal represents 40% of our projected revenue for this quarter. If we lose this transaction, we'll miss our numbers by a margin that will trigger covenant violations." Patricia Wells captured their miscalculation. "I've reviewed the legal opinion we commissioned. If Nicholas was terminated during active deal negotiations, his non-compete agreement is likely void. Our attempt to continue the Castellano relationship without him could be viewed as tortious interference." Richard's next email showed him frantically trying to salvage the situation. "I'm going to call Antonio directly and explain that Nicholas was terminated for cause. Surely they'll understand that the relationship belongs to Meridian." That phone call didn't go well. Richard's follow-up email was corporate panic barely disguised. "Antonio Castellano just hung up on me. He used language I won't repeat, but..." The substance was that they consider our treatment of Nicholas dishonorable and indicative of poor character. He mentioned evidence of premeditation that suggests Nicholas shared our internal communications. James Morrison's response revealed the deeper implications. If we lose the Castellano relationship, it's not just about this deal. Antonio sits on 17 other family business boards. His word carries enormous weight. If he tells other families, "We can't be trusted," we could lose access to an entire market segment. The partners' emails became increasingly frantic as they realized the cascading effects. Other European clients were asking questions about my sudden departure. Several pending deals were being put on hold. The most damaging email came from Richard. "After a sleepless night, I think we need to face reality. Nicholas Vale was the European division. We built our entire continental strategy around his relationships and expertise. Without him, we're just another American investment bank with no meaningful presence in family office markets." James Morrison's admission captured their fundamental miscalculation. We treated Nicholas like an expensive employee who could be replaced. What we failed to understand is that he wasn't working for us. We were working for him. By firing him, we didn't eliminate a cost center. We eliminated our competitive advantage. Patricia Wells' final email captured their complete reversal. Nicholas has just announced Vale, Capital's first major hire, our former star analyst from London. 3 other European team members have submitted resignations this week. We're not just losing the Castellano deal. We're losing the entire foundation of our European business. The email chain that had begun with confidence in their ability to control the situation ended with the realization that they'd committed strategic suicide. Their attempt to steal my deal had backfired so spectacularly that they'd handed me the keys to their entire European operation. We're just another American investment bank with no meaningful presence in family office markets. We may have just destroyed the most valuable part of our business to save a few million in compensation. Their attempts at damage control only made the situation worse. When they reached out to other European contacts to position themselves as Nicholas Vale's natural successors, they discovered that many of these relationships were more personal than institutional. Family patriarchs who had worked with me for years had no interest in starting over with new representatives from Meridian. The email chain's most revealing moment came in James Morrison's admission of their fundamental miscalculation. We treated Nicholas like an expensive employee who could be replaced. What we failed to understand is that he wasn't working for us. We were working for him. His relationships, his cultural understanding, his deal-making ability, that was the real value of our European division. By firing him, we didn't eliminate a cost center. We eliminated our competitive advantage. Their desperate attempts to discredit me only accelerated their reputational damage. When rumors began circulating about Meridian's internal dysfunction, other talented employees started exploring external opportunities. The firm that had prided itself on stability and institutional strength was beginning to look like a sinking ship. Patricia Wells' final email in the chain captured their complete reversal of fortune. Nicholas has just announced Vale, Capital's first major hire, our former star analyst from the London office. 3 other European team members have submitted their resignations this week. We're not just losing the Castellano deal. We're losing the entire foundation of our European business. The angry email chain that had begun with confidence in their ability to control the Gilead situation ended with the dawning realization that they'd committed strategic suicide. Their attempt to steal my deal had backfired so spectacularly that they'd essentially handed me the keys to their entire European operation. As I read through these emails, obtained through discovery in the legal proceedings that followed, I felt a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Satisfaction because their panic validated every decision I'd made since that termination text. Sadness because it didn't have to end this way. If they'd simply honored their promises and treated me with the respect my contributions deserved, we all could have prospered together. Instead, their greed and arrogance had transformed me from a loyal employee into their most dangerous competitor. The empire they'd spent decades building was crumbling, while the firm I'd started with nothing was just beginning its ascent. The Financial Times article appeared on the front page exactly 1 week after my termination. Under the headline, "Corporate Betrayal Backfires: How Meridian Capital Lost $3.2 billion Deal to Fired Employee," the story would become the most read business article of the year and transform my personal nightmare into a global symbol of corporate karma. Rebecca Marsh, the investigative journalist who wrote the piece, had contacted me after hearing rumors about unusual activity in the European family office market. Elena had convinced me that transparency would serve my interests better than silence. The truth is your best defense, she'd argued. The article was a masterpiece that laid bare the calculated cruelty of Meridian's betrayal while highlighting the poetic justice of my independent success. Rebecca had obtained copies of the WhatsApp thread, the termination email, and other internal communications that revealed the premeditated nature of their plan. In an age when corporate loyalty is increasingly rare, the article began. The story of Nicholas Vale reads like a modern morality tale. Vale, who built Meridian's European division from nothing, was terminated by text message while flying to close the firm's largest deal ever. The twist: his termination legally freed him to complete that deal independently. The international response was immediate and overwhelming. Within hours, my phone was ringing with calls from journalists, competitors, and potential clients. The story had struck a nerve with business professionals who'd experienced similar betrayals. The European business community's reaction was particularly gratifying. Family office managers and private wealth advisors who'd worked with me began reaching out to express their support. I always wondered why such a talented advisor was willing to work for such an unimpressive firm. One Geneva-based wealth manager told the Swiss financial press, "Now I understand that he wasn't working for them, they were working for him." The media attention created a snowball effect that amplified Vale Capital's credibility far beyond what years of traditional marketing could have achieved. I wasn't just a former Meridian employee. I was the symbol of entrepreneurial justice. The David who'd slain Goliath using nothing but integrity and intelligence. Business publications across Europe, Asia, and the Americas picked up the narrative, each adding their own cultural perspective. The media coverage attracted attention from other European family businesses evaluating their own advisory relationships. Antonio Castellano's public support, he gave an interview praising my exceptional integrity under pressure, served as a powerful endorsement. The contrast between media coverage of Vale Capital versus Meridian couldn't have been more stark. While journalists celebrated my story as entrepreneurial success, Meridian was being portrayed as a cautionary tale about corporate arrogance. The partners at Meridian seemed to have forgotten a fundamental principle, wrote one London columnist. Clients don't hire firms, they hire people. By discarding their most valuable relationship builder, Meridian has essentially dismantled their European business. The most satisfying aspect was its impact on talent recruitment. The story had inspired several high-level professionals to reach out about joining Vale Capital. They were attracted not just by the business opportunity, but by the chance to work for an organization that had demonstrated its commitment to ethical behavior. As I read through the international coverage, I realized that Meridian's betrayal had given me something invaluable, a founding mythology that would define Vale Capital's culture for years to come. We weren't just another advisory firm, we were the firm born from a refusal to accept corruption. The media firestorm had transformed my personal crisis into a global business legend, reinforcing the same message. Character beats cleverness, and loyalty to principles pays better dividends than loyalty to undeserving institutions. The court filing documents arrived at Vale Capital's Zurich offices on a gray Monday morning. The lawsuit, filed in the Southern District of New York, was Meridian's desperate attempt to reclaim control over a situation that had spiraled beyond their ability to manage. Meridian Capital Partners, v. Nicholas Vale and Vale Capital AG, filled 127 pages with allegations ranging from breach of fiduciary duty to theft of trade secrets. The complaint painted me as a rogue employee who had systematically stolen client relationships and business opportunities. The central allegation was that I had violated my fiduciary duties by negotiating with the Castellano family while still employed by Meridian. According to their legal theory, any communications I'd had with clients during my employment belonged to the firm. Mr. Vale's actions represent a calculated scheme to deprive Meridian of the fruits of its investment in developing European client relationships, the complaint stated. His termination for cause was justified by his pattern of disloyalty. The language was personal and vindictive, designed to destroy my reputation and scare potential clients away from Vale Capital. They were betting that I lacked the resources to fight a prolonged legal battle. My response, crafted by international litigators, was devastating in its precision. Rather than simply defending against their allegations, we went on the offensive, using their own internal communications to expose the premeditated nature of their betrayal. The plaintiff's claims are not only without merit but represent a transparent attempt to use the legal system to accomplish what they failed to achieve through legitimate business competition. Our countersuit began. The discovery phase became a litigation goldmine. Under court order, Meridian was forced to produce thousands of internal emails and messages that revealed the full extent of their dysfunction. The WhatsApp thread was just the tip of the iceberg. The most damaging evidence came from Richard Blackwood's personal communications, which showed he'd been planning to marginalize me for over a year while publicly praising my contributions. But the smoking gun was a recorded phone conversation between the 3 senior partners from 6 months before my termination. The key is timing. James Morrison's voice was clearly audible, saying, "We need to wait until he's completely invested in closing a major deal, then terminate him while he's away from the office." The recordings proved that Meridian's leadership had not only planned my termination, but had specifically designed it to maximize their ability to steal my work while minimizing my ability to defend myself. Our countersuit expanded beyond wrongful termination to include claims for fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and tortious interference with business relationships. We argued that Meridian's actions had damaged not only me but also the Castellano family and other clients. The court's preliminary ruling was a complete vindication of my position. Judge Margaret Chen issued a scathing opinion that rejected virtually every aspect of Meridian's claims. The evidence presented suggests that the plaintiff's termination of Mr. Vale was not a legitimate business decision, but a calculated attempt to appropriate the economic benefits of his work. She wrote, "Such conduct is antithetical to the principles of fair dealing." The court issued a preliminary injunction that prevented Meridian from interfering with Vale Capital's business operations. The ruling effectively recognized that my relationships with European family businesses were personal rather than institutional. The legal victory created a domino effect that accelerated Meridian's decline. Other former employees, emboldened by the court's findings, began filing their own lawsuits, alleging similar patterns of abuse. The litigation had transformed from Meridian's attempt to destroy me into a comprehensive expose of their corrupt business practices. Every document production revealed new evidence of their systematic betrayal of employees and clients alike. As I reviewed the court filing documents that had started this legal warfare, I realized that Meridian's lawsuit had been their final strategic mistake. In their desperation to reclaim control, they'd given me access to the very evidence I needed to prove their systematic corruption. The partnership agreement that arrived at Vale Capital's offices 6 months after our Rome meeting was unlike anything I'd seen in 15 years of deal-making. Hand-delivered by Elena Benedetti herself, the document represented a formal alliance that would transform both organizations. "The Castellano family has been discussing this for months," Elena explained as we reviewed the terms in my corner office. "They want to formalize what has already become a strategic partnership." The numbers were staggering. The Castellanos were offering to become the anchor investor in Vale Capital's first institutional fund, committing 500 million euros in capital. In exchange, I would serve as their exclusive advisor for all international expansion plans. "This isn't just about the money," Antonio explained during our video call. "It's about creating a model that other families can follow." The big banks had forgotten that they're supposed to serve their clients, not the other way around. The expansion plans were breathtaking in scope. Over the next 5 years, the Castellanos intended to acquire complementary businesses across Europe, establish joint ventures in emerging markets, and create a network of family office partnerships. We've identified 17 target companies that fit our strategic objectives, Marco explained. But we need someone who understands both the financial complexity and the cultural sensitivity required. The pipeline of opportunities was worth over 10 billion euros, representing everything from renewable energy projects in Scandinavia to technology companies in Eastern Europe. The first major expansion project was a renewable energy joint venture with the Hoffmann family in Germany. The Hoffmanns own one of Europe's largest wind energy companies and were looking to expand into solar and hydroelectric projects. German efficiency meets Italian relationship building, I explained to both families during our Munich meeting. The potential is enormous, but success depends on creating a structure that honors both approaches. The deal took 4 months to negotiate, involving lawyers and regulatory experts from 6 countries. The result was a 2.8 billion euros joint venture that combined the Hoffmanns' technical expertise with the Castellanos' market presence and Vale Capital's financial structuring. The success led to referrals from other German family businesses, expanding Vale Capital's network into previously inaccessible markets. Each new relationship brought additional opportunities, creating a virtuous cycle of growth and credibility. The partnership also attracted attention from institutional investors looking for alternatives to traditional investment banking. Sovereign wealth funds and pension systems began reaching out for advice on European family business investments. You've created something unique, the head of investments at Norway's government pension fund told me. You understand both the institutional side and the family side of these transactions. The partnership agreement had transformed Vale Capital from a startup advisory firm into a major player in European finance. Our client roster now included some of the continent's most prestigious families. Our transaction volume had exceeded 5 billion euros, and our reputation for integrity was attracting top talent. As I reviewed the signed partnership agreement that evening, I realized this document represented the complete transformation of my professional identity. I was no longer the former Meridian employee who had started an independent firm. I was the architect of a new approach to European finance and credibility. The partnership with the Castellanos also attracted attention from institutional investors who were looking for alternatives to traditional investment banking relationships. Sovereign wealth funds, pension systems, and insurance companies began reaching out to Vale Capital for advice on European family business investments. You've created something unique, the head of investments at Norway's government pension fund told me during a meeting in Oslo. You understand both the institutional side and the family side of these transactions. That's incredibly valuable in today's market. The partnership agreement had transformed Vale Capital from a startup advisory firm into a major player in European finance. Our client roster now included some of the continent's most prestigious families. Our transaction volume had exceeded 5 billion euros, and our reputation for integrity and expertise was attracting the best talent in the industry. But the most satisfying aspect of the expansion was its impact on the broader market. Other advisory firms began adopting Vale Capital's relationship-focused approach, recognizing that the traditional model of aggressive deal-making was losing effectiveness with sophisticated clients. You've changed the conversation, a senior banker from Credit Suisse told me during an industry conference. Families are now asking why they should work with institutions that don't understand their values. You've raised the bar for everyone. The partnership agreement with the Castellanos had become the foundation for something much larger than either of us had originally envisioned. We weren't just building a business, we were creating a new model for how financial services could be delivered to Europe's most important private clients. As I reviewed the signed partnership agreement in my office that evening, watching the sunset reflect off the lake's surface, I realized that this document represented the complete transformation of my professional identity. I was no longer Nicholas Vale, the former Meridian employee who had started an independent firm. I was Nicholas Vale, the architect of a new approach to European finance. The Castellano expansion had proven that integrity and expertise could triumph over institutional advantages, that relationships built on mutual respect could generate better results than those based on information asymmetries and aggressive sales tactics. The partnership agreement was more than a business document, was a manifesto for the future of financial services. The settlement term sheet arrived on a Tuesday morning, 18 months after Meridian had filed their original lawsuit. The document represented their complete capitulation to the reality that their betrayal had backfired spectacularly. Meridian's financial position had deteriorated dramatically. The loss of the Castellano deal had triggered a cascade of client defections, regulatory investigations, and internal scandals that had transformed the once prestigious firm into a cautionary tale. "They're bleeding money," my litigation counsel explained as we reviewed the settlement offer. "The legal fees alone are approaching $15 million, and that's not counting the revenue they've lost from client defections." The terms were remarkably generous. They were proposing to pay $25 million in damages, publicly acknowledged that my termination had been inappropriate, and agreed to a comprehensive non-disparagement clause. The settlement represented Meridian's admission that they had fundamentally misunderstood their own business. By agreeing to pay substantial damages for losing my services, they were acknowledging that their European division had been built around my relationships rather than their institutional brand. "This is more than a settlement," I told Elena during our evening call. "It's a vindication of everything we've built." They're essentially paying me to stay away because they know they can't compete with what we've created. The settlement negotiations had been preceded by months of desperate attempts by Meridian to salvage their reputation. They'd hired new leadership, restructured their European operations, and launched expensive marketing campaigns. None of it had worked. "The market has spoken," Antonio Castellano told me. "Families don't want to work with firms that treat their own employees the way Meridian treated you. It's not just about competence, it's about character." The settlement discussions had been complicated by Meridian's internal power struggles. The three senior partners who had orchestrated my termination were now fighting among themselves, each trying to avoid responsibility for the strategic disaster they created. The terms I ultimately accepted were designed not just to compensate me for past damages, but to ensure that Meridian could never again interfere with Vale Capital's operations. The $25 million payment would be structured as a business investment, providing additional capital for expansion. More importantly, the settlement included a comprehensive non-compete clause that would prevent Meridian from pursuing family office clients in Europe for 5 years. They were essentially paying me to take control of the market segment they had spent decades developing. The final settlement conference took place at the Waldorf Astoria in Manhattan. Patricia Wells, the only surviving senior partner, looked defeated as she signed the documents. "I hope you understand that this was never personal," she said as we shook hands. "No," I replied calmly. "It was personal when you fired me by text message. It was personal when you tried to steal credit for my work. But my success, that's just business." The settlement had started as Meridian's attempt to minimize their losses and became the foundation for Vale Capital's complete dominance of the European family office market. Their payment would fund our expansion, their non-compete agreement would eliminate our primary competitor, and their public acknowledgement would enhance our reputation. As I reviewed the signed settlement documents that evening, I realized this moment represented more than just the end of a legal battle. It was the complete transformation of my professional identity from victim to victor, from employee to entrepreneur, from someone who accepted betrayal to someone who turned it into triumph. The Vale Capital letterhead that arrived from our Swiss printers represented more than just corporate stationery. It was the physical manifestation of a transformation that had exceeded my wildest expectations. The elegant design, featuring our logo embossed in gold against cream-colored paper, would soon become one of the most recognized symbols in European private wealth management. 3 years after that devastating text message on a transatlantic flight, Vale Capital had evolved from a startup advisory firm into a major force in European finance. Our client roster included royal families, industrial dynasties, and sovereign wealth funds across 17 countries. Our transaction volume had exceeded 15 billion euros, and our reputation for integrity and expertise had attracted the most talented professionals in the industry. The numbers told only part of the story. More important was the cultural transformation we had achieved in how financial services were delivered to Europe's most sophisticated clients. The relationship-focused approach that had once seemed naive compared to Meridian's aggressive tactics had become the industry standard for family office work. "You've changed the entire conversation," the head of private banking at UBS told me during an industry conference in Monaco. "Families are now asking their advisors why they should work with institutions that don't understand their values. You've raised the bar for everyone." The physical manifestation of our success was impressive. Our Zurich headquarters occupied 3 floors of a restored Belle Epoque building on Paradeplets, with additional offices in London, Milan, and New York. The spaces were designed to reflect our values: elegant but not ostentatious, sophisticated but not intimidating, traditional but not outdated. Each office was a testament to the relationships we had built rather than the deals we had closed. The London office featured photographs from client events and family celebrations. The Milan office displayed artwork from Italian clients who had commissioned pieces specifically for our space. The New York office, opened despite my complicated history with American finance, showcased our international perspective and growing influence. The team we had assembled was equally impressive. Sarah Chun had evolved from my former assistant to chief operating officer, managing a staff of over 60 professionals across 4 countries. Marcus Webb had become our head of European markets, leveraging his Goldman Sachs experience to build institutional relationships that complemented our family office focus. The hiring had been strategic rather than rapid. Each new team member was selected not just for their technical expertise, but for their alignment with Vale Capital's values and culture. We were building an organization that could outlast any individual, including myself, while maintaining the integrity and client focus that had made our success possible. "The quality of talent you've attracted is remarkable," Elena Benedetti observed during one of our quarterly board meetings. "These aren't just skilled professionals. They're people who believe in what you're building. That's incredibly valuable in an industry where cynicism is common." The pipeline of opportunities had grown beyond our capacity to handle every interesting transaction. The Castellano partnership had introduced us to other prominent European families, each of whom brought their own networks and opportunities. The challenge was no longer finding clients, but managing our growth while maintaining the quality of service that had made our reputation. The most satisfying aspect of our success was its impact on the broader industry. Other firms had begun adopting Vale Capital's relationship-focused approach, recognizing that the traditional model of aggressive deal-making was losing effectiveness with sophisticated clients. We had proven that integrity and expertise could generate better results than politics and manipulation. "You've created a new category," the managing partner of a major consulting firm told me during a strategy discussion. "Family offices now have an alternative to traditional investment banking that actually serves their interests rather than exploiting them. That's a significant market innovation." The recognition extended beyond business circles. European business schools were teaching case studies about Vale Capital's founding and growth. using our story as an example of how entrepreneurial success could emerge from corporate betrayal. The transformation from victim to victor had become a template for other professionals facing similar challenges. The international expansion had been particularly gratifying. Our New York office, despite the awkwardness of competing directly with Meridian in their home market, had attracted several prominent American families who were impressed by our European success. The irony of former Meridian clients choosing to work with the advisor they had tried to destroy was not lost on anyone in the industry. The American market is different, I explained to our New York team during their first quarterly meeting. But the principles are the same. Clients want advisors who understand their needs, respect their values, and deliver results without compromising their integrity. We've proven that model works in Europe, and it will work here too. The technology infrastructure we had built was cutting edge but never overshadowed the human relationships that remain central to our success. We use sophisticated analytical tools to evaluate investment opportunities and manage risk. But every major decision was made through personal consultation with clients rather than algorithmic automation. Technology should enhance relationships, not replace them. I told a conference of fintech entrepreneurs in Frankfurt. We've invested heavily in systems that help us serve our clients better. But we've never forgotten that this business is fundamentally about trust between people. The Vale Capital letterhead that had started as a simple business necessity had become a symbol of something much larger. When clients received documents bearing our logo, they knew they were working with an organization that prioritized their interests over its own profits, that valued long-term relationships over short-term transactions, and that would never compromise its integrity for financial gain. As I reviewed the latest batch of letterhead in my Zurich office, watching the afternoon sun reflect off Lake Zurich's surface, I realized that this physical symbol represented the complete transformation of my professional identity. I was no longer Nicholas Vale, the betrayed employee who had started an independent firm. I was Nicholas Vale, the founder of a new model for European finance. The empire we had built was more than just a successful business. It was proof that integrity and expertise could triumph over institutional advantages, that relationships built on mutual respect could generate better results than those based on manipulation and exploitation, and that sometimes the best revenge against betrayal is massive ethical success. The letterhead would continue to evolve as Vale Capital grew and expanded, but it would always represent the same fundamental principles that had guided our success from the beginning: integrity, expertise, and an unwavering commitment to serving our clients' best interests rather than our own. The family photo sitting on my desk captured a moment of pure joy that would have been impossible during my years at Meridian. Elena and I stood in the garden of our new home in Kusnacht, overlooking Lake Zurich, with our twin Sophie and James playing at our feet. The image represented more than just professional success. It embodied the personal transformation that had accompanied my business achievements. The house itself was a testament to how dramatically our lives had changed. The 19th century villa, with its terraced gardens and panoramic lake views, would have been an impossible dream on my Meridian salary. But more importantly, it represented the kind of life I could now provide for my family, one where financial security allowed us to focus on what truly mattered. "I barely recognized the person you were 3 years ago," Elena told me during one of our evening walks along the lake. "You were so consumed with proving yourself to people who would never appreciate you. Now, you're building something meaningful that aligns with your values." The transformation had been gradual but profound. At Meridian, I had been constantly anxious about politics and positioning, always worried about how my actions would be perceived by partners who might never promote me. The stress had affected every aspect of my life: my health, my relationships, my ability to enjoy simple pleasures. Now, as the founder and managing partner of Vale Capital, I felt a sense of purpose and fulfillment that had been absent during my corporate years. The work was still challenging, often more demanding than anything I had done at Meridian, but it was challenging in ways that energized rather than depleted me. The difference is that you're finally working for yourself and your clients rather than for people who don't deserve your loyalty, Elena observed. That changes everything about how you approach your work. The personal relationships I had built with clients had become genuine friendships that extended beyond business. Antonio Castellano had become a mentor and father figure, offering wisdom about business and life that went far beyond our professional relationship. Other clients had become regular guests at our home, sharing meals and conversations that had nothing to do with financial transactions. This is how business should be conducted, Giuseppe Castellano told me during a dinner at our home. When you trust and respect the people you work with, everything becomes easier and more enjoyable. You've created something special here. The impact on my family life had been equally transformative. During my Meridian years, I had missed countless dinners, school events, and family vacations due to the demands of building someone else's business. Now, as the owner of my own firm, I could structure my schedule around my family's needs rather than my employer's demands. Daddy's home for dinner every night now, Sophie had announced to her kindergarten class, apparently proud of this unprecedented development. Her innocent observation highlighted how dramatically my work-life balance had improved since leaving the corporate world. The financial security that came with Vale Capital's success had eliminated the constant anxiety that had plagued our family finances during my corporate years. Elena had been able to reduce her legal practice to focus on cases that interested her rather than ones that paid the bills. We could afford the best schools, healthcare, and opportunities for our children without the constant worry about budgets and expenses. But more important than the material benefits was the psychological transformation. I no longer felt like I was at the mercy of other people's decisions about my career and compensation. The control over my own destiny had restored a sense of confidence and optimism that had been eroded by years of corporate politics and broken promises. You sleep better now, Elena observed one morning as we shared coffee on our terrace. You used to wake up at 3 a.m. worrying about some political situation at the office. Now you wake up excited about the day ahead. The lessons learned from Meridians. Betrayal had made me a better leader and a more empathetic employer. I understood the importance of recognizing and rewarding exceptional performance, of maintaining transparency in communication, and of creating an environment where talented people could thrive without political interference. You've built the kind of organization you always wished you could work for, Sarah Chen told me during one of our team meetings. That's why everyone here is so committed to Vale Capital's success. They know they're working for someone who understands what it's like to be an employee. The personal transformation had also affected my relationship with success itself. At Meridian, I had been driven by a desperate need to prove myself to people who would never fully appreciate my contributions. Now, success felt more sustainable and meaningful because it was built on genuine relationships and ethical practices rather than political maneuvering. You've learned to define success on your own terms, Elena said as we watched the sunset paint the lake in shades of gold and pink. That's made you happier and more effective as a leader. The family photo on my desk served as a daily reminder of what really mattered. Professional success was important, but it was meaningful only when it contributed to a life well lived rather than dominating it. The betrayal that had seemed so devastating at the time had actually freed me to build something better, not just a more successful business, but a more fulfilling life. The children had no memory of the anxiety and stress that had characterized our family life during my corporate years. For them, this was normal: a father who was present and engaged, parents who were financially secure and emotionally available, a home that was a sanctuary rather than a place where work stress was processed. This is what I wanted for our family, I told Elena as we tucked the twins into bed one evening. Not just financial security, but the kind of life where we can focus on what's truly important. The personal transformation had been as profound as the professional one. I had evolved from someone who sought validation from others to someone who found satisfaction in serving clients and building something meaningful. The family photo on my desk represented the ultimate measure of success, not just what I had achieved professionally, but what I had become personally. The industry award arrived on a crisp October morning, 5 years after that devastating text message had changed my life forever. The European Private Wealth Management Association's highest honor, the Excellence in Ethical Leadership Award, represented recognition from the very industry that had once seemed determined to destroy me. The crystal trophy, engraved with Vale Capital's logo and my name, sat on my desk as I prepared for the acceptance ceremony in Vienna. The irony wasn't lost on me that I would be receiving an award for ethical leadership from an organization that had initially questioned whether my departure from Meridian represented a breach of professional standards. The industry has come full circle, Elena Benedetti observed during our preparation call. 5 years ago, some people questioned whether you were breaking ethical norms by competing with your former employer. Now you're being recognized as the standard-bearer for ethical behavior in private wealth management. The citation accompanying the award captured the transformation that had occurred both in my career and in the industry's understanding of what constituted ethical leadership. Nicholas Vale has redefined the relationship between financial advisors and their clients, proving that integrity and expertise can triumph over institutional advantages and political maneuvering. As I reviewed my acceptance speech, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this moment. The betrayal that had seemed so devastating at the time had actually been the catalyst for everything that followed. Without Meridian's calculated cruelty, I might never have discovered my own capacity for independent success. The speech I had written focused on the lessons learned from that experience, particularly the importance of choosing integrity over expedience, even when the costs seem unbearable. Sometimes the universe presents us with what appears to be a crisis, I had written, but is actually an opportunity to discover who we really are and what we're truly capable of achieving. The ceremony itself was held in the Vienna State Opera House, a venue that had hosted emperors and artists for centuries. As I walked to the podium to accept the award, I thought about the contrast between this moment and that terrible evening in my Rome hotel room when I had first processed the scope of Meridian's betrayal. The audience included many of the same people who had once viewed me as an upstart competitor challenging the established order. Now they were applauding someone who had proven that the established order needed to be challenged, that the industry could be more ethical and more effective when it prioritized client interests over institutional profits. 5 years ago, I was fired by text message while flying to close a deal. I began, my voice carrying clearly through the opera house's perfect acoustics. At the time, it felt like the end of my career. Today, I understand it was actually the beginning of my true professional life. The audience listened intently as I described the journey from that moment of betrayal to this recognition of ethical leadership. I spoke about the importance of maintaining integrity even when faced with impossible choices, about the value of building relationships based on mutual respect rather than information asymmetries, and about the responsibility that comes with success in serving others rather than just serving oneself. The greatest lesson I learned is that our responses to betrayal define us more than the betrayal itself, I continued. We can choose to become bitter and vengeful, or we can choose to become better and more determined. The choice we make determines not just our professional success, but our personal character. The standing ovation that followed was not just recognition of my individual achievements, but acknowledgement of the broader transformation that had occurred in European private wealth. management. The relationship-focused approach that had once seemed naive compared to aggressive. Institutional tactics had become the industry standard for sophisticated clients. After the ceremony, I was approached by dozens of colleagues, competitors, and clients who wanted to share their own stories of professional challenges and ethical choices. The award had created a platform for conversations about the importance of integrity in an industry that had sometimes lost sight of its fundamental purpose. You've inspired a generation of advisors to prioritize their clients' interests over their own career advancement, a young banker from Deutsche Bank told me during the reception. That's a legacy that extends far beyond your business success. The most meaningful conversation came from Richard Blackwood, my former partner at Meridian, who had approached me during the cocktail hour. His appearance had changed dramatically. Looked older, more subdued, as if the weight of his decisions had taken a physical toll. "I need to apologize," he said quietly, away from the crowd. "What we did to you was wrong, and I've regretted it every day since. You built something remarkable from the ashes of our betrayal, and you did it with more integrity than we ever showed." His apology was unexpected but not unwelcome. The anger I had once felt toward him and his colleagues had long since transformed into something closer to pity. They had destroyed their own careers and reputation in their attempt to steal credit for my work, while I had built something far more valuable than anything they had ever achieved. "I appreciate that," I replied. "But the real lesson isn't about what you did to me. It's about what we all choose to do when faced with difficult situations. You can still make different choices going forward." The conversation with Richard brought a sense of closure that I hadn't realized I needed. The cycle of betrayal and revenge that had defined the early years of Vale Capital's existence had finally given way to something more constructive, a focus on building rather than destroying, on serving rather than competing, on creating value rather than capturing it. As the evening wound down and I prepared to return to Zurich, I reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought me to this point. The award sitting in my briefcase represented more than individual recognition. It was validation of the principle that integrity and expertise could triumph over institutional advantages and political maneuvering. The industry that had once questioned my decision to compete with my former employer was now celebrating that decision as an example of ethical leadership. The clients who had followed me from Meridian to Vale Capital had become some of the most successful and satisfied private wealth management relationships in Europe. But perhaps most importantly, the personal transformation that had accompanied my professional success had created a life that was meaningful beyond material achievement. The family photo on my desk, the relationships I had built with clients who had become genuine friends, the team I had assembled at Vale Capital, all of it represented a kind of success that couldn't be measured in financial terms. If this story resonates with you, I concluded in my acceptance speech, if you've ever felt betrayed by people you trusted or undervalued by institutions you served, remember that your response to that betrayal will define your future more than the betrayal itself. Choose integrity over expedience. Choose building over destroying. Choose serving others over serving yourself. The rewards, both professional and personal, will exceed anything you thought possible. The standing ovation that followed was not just for me, but for everyone who had faced similar challenges and chosen the difficult path of ethical leadership. The award ceremony had become a celebration of the principle that sometimes the best revenge against betrayal is not revenge at all, but the creation of something so successful and meaningful that it transforms the very industry that witnessed the original wrong. As I flew back to Zurich that night, looking down at the lights of European cities where Vale Capital now served some of the continent's most prestigious families, I realized that the journey from betrayal to triumph had come full circle. The text message that had once seemed to end my career had actually been the beginning of my true professional life. The most important lesson wasn't about business or finance. It was about the transformative power of choosing integrity over expedience, of building rather than destroying, of serving others rather than serving only yourself. Sometimes the tables turn in the most unexpected ways, and the betrayal that seems to destroy us actually becomes the foundation for our greatest triumph.